right, well, thank you, Vator and Bambi, for having me come here and speak. Today is all about what are lessons that we can share with entrepreneurs, and this is something I've been doing for a long time. So I was really excited to come here and share my learnings and to tell you something that you probably haven't seen before, I hope. So just a little bit about my background. I've been doing this for a long time. So I started my first company when I was 15 years old in high school. I sold that company to Intermix Media. To my parents' dismay, I dropped out of high school. They were fortunately supportive and drove me to Connecticut from Missouri and supported me. Not financially, but emotionally. Over the last 18 years, I've been building companies. I've been fortunate to build 5 companies that have done almost $3 billion in revenue. 3 of those companies had successful exits, major sales. One of those was a very painful and humbling bankruptcy, and we learned a lot from it. Helped to take Intermix Media public in 1999, and then very quickly lived through the dot-com crash. And then over the years, from all these companies, have raised about $350 million. And then now I'm the world's worst venture partner at Crosscut, where I attend about 1 or 2 meetings a year, but I do help those guys on their e-commerce investments, and they haven't kicked me out yet, so I'm thankful. So, coming here and speaking to you guys really got me thinking about what's the connection and what have I learned from all of this. And my number one takeaway is that I've been really freaking lucky. And where I feel like I've been most lucky has been in the people that I've worked with. So one is I have a co-CEO that I've now worked with for 14 years. So that's longer than many marriages. It's longer than my marriage. And we are complete opposites. We actually spent the first year hating each other, and now we're before we started the company, and now we're best of friends. But we're very, very different people. But we found that, hey, we have a unique partnership that helps us create great companies. Also, I have a CTO and CIO that I've known for 17 years that I've taken from company to company to company. And now at JustFab, we have this incredible team that makes Don and I look good. And they are really incredible people. So most of our success, we owe to them. Some of our ideas were pretty spot on and some were not, but it was the team that helped us figure out how to get it there. Which got me thinking, how do you build a team besides just being lucky? Because I will say on it, we were just lucky in how we built our team. So you guys have heard this all when you go think about, hey, how do you make a successful company or how do you raise capital? And we tell this at Crosscut. There's really 4 dimensions. You got to have a great idea. The idea has to go hit a big market because it takes just as much work to do a small idea. It takes just as much work to do an idea that attacks a small market versus a big market. So you better pick a big market. And you better be good at executing, right? Because when you want to go raise your Series A, VCs, they want to see momentum and they want to see proof points. And they want to say, hey, they always say, we really invest in teams. But what do they mean? And why do they say we got to invest in teams? And of these dimensions, which are the most important? So to me, by far, the most important is your team. And the reason is it's the one dimension that you will not get a second chance at. So if you think about how long your seed capital is going to last and how long you have to execute your plan once you raise your Series A, you will not have a chance, most likely, to go bring in a new team if you hire the wrong one. So one, it will take you a while to realize you made a mistake. You'll probably wait too long to admit it. And then by the time you've done it, there may not be enough time to turn things around. As opposed to, if your idea isn't perfect, hopefully your team's going to help you tweak it. Or if you're not going after the right market, you'll adjust your idea and go after a different market. So that's why team is so important. But it's also a really hard one just to get right. So how do you know you're working with the right people until you actually work with them? And this is largely the data that I discounted my entire career. Only a couple years ago was I turned on to that there's actually data out there to help you build a real team and a great team that you can work with. For the first 16 years of my career, I don't know if it was arrogance or not seeing it happen, but I did not believe that there was data to help you figure out who you should work with and how you should work with your team. So to give you a little bit of background, so what I'm going to tell you guys about today is the Harrison Assessment, which is something I really believe in. If I put you to sleep, I apologize on it, but it really is an incredible tool. But I want to tell you first how I came to it, which I am naturally incredibly skeptical of any sort of personality assessment or team building tool or assessment. At Intermix Media, I did the Myers-Briggs. How many people here have done the Myers-Briggs? Went through it. It was interesting, sort of a team building experience. Didn't find it super actionable, and certainly would never bring it to any of my companies in my view. The other view I always had was I did not believe in executive coaching. So my view is, hey, I'm going to pay somebody $250,000 and they're supposed to be the best. Why the hell do they need a coach? That's what I'm hiring them for, which is also wrong, and we'll get to that point. So we brought in a very forward-thinking head of HR, which she also renamed to the people team. And one of our key executives, who was running a $200 million line of business for us, got an executive coach. And in the first 3-4 weeks, I saw a real change in this individual that I did not think was possible. And when I took him to lunch and was talking to him about it and asking him what's changed, he said, I took this Harrison assessment, and it opened up exactly my weaknesses and my strengths, and I knew what to focus on. And I'm just sitting there thinking, oh man, this is ridiculous. This is what we're paying all this money for. So I immediately I didn't say that to him. I said, I'm glad to see the improvement and doing great. And then I immediately went back to my desk and said, okay, I want to take the same exact Harrison assessment from that coach so I can tell him what a waste of time and money he's delivering and think of all the reasons to poke holes in it. So he sent me the link, I took the test, and it looked something like this. So take these 8 sentences and rank them in order of how they describe you. So one of them has to be number 1, one of them has to be number 8, and it's a forced ranking. So it's really usually easy to pick number 1, it's really easy to pick number 8, but the 4, 5, and 6 get murky. And when I saw this, I'm like, oh, this is ridiculous. This is even worse than the Myers-Briggs. How can I fix someone with the question of, I like myself the way I am, I don't mind having to stand for long periods, I like fixing or repairing things. The questions seem absurd, and actually it takes about 20 minutes to take the assessment. It's a lot of questions like this. I was so happy when I was done, one, because it was only 20 minutes, and I could not wait to go have my coffee with this coach and let him know what I thought about it. Now, I did not see the results of the test. They went to him. So we went to our coffee, he handed me the paper, and from the moment I looked at it, and the more he walked me through it, I said, holy shit, this is exactly me. Even the parts that I didn't want to admit that I'm not good at, they were exactly my main weaknesses and my main fears. And I was pretty sold from day one. Now, since then, we have brought this out to the rest of our executive leadership team, and every person has said this is pretty spot on about who they are. And without forcing it, they're all brought it to their teams. So we've now had several hundred people in our organization go through the Harrison assessment. It really, none of it's been forced. It's all been voluntary. Do you want to go through it? So the shit works. So I'm not smart enough, nor do I fully understand the science behind it, but it's backed in science. So the guy who created it has dual PhDs in mathematics and psychology. It's based on 175 different traits. There's been 20 million people that have taken it. There's 3 million profiles. It's used by a lot of companies, many of these much bigger than Just Fab. And it really can help you predict performance, motivation, and retention. It's pretty cool. So what it's based on in the East, they call this, my computer did not fall asleep. It's just, it's a PC with a Mac adapter, so it's high risk. Let's see here. All right, so it's really based off on in the East, yin-yang theory, which is this concept that one trait can't exist without its opposite. And the difference between a lot of these Myers-Briggs type tests is they tell you one dimension about yourself, which may be good or may be bad. It really matters what it's paired with. So here in the West, we actually call it paradox theory, which is 2 traits which seem contradictory actually can coexist. So the report is actually about 50 pages long. I'm not going to take you through all of it, but the crux of it is really about 12 paradoxes. And they live on different axes of telling you about ones that are key to leadership, others that are key to achievement, your interpersonal skills, and then how good are you at initiating, motivating, implementing, or maintaining. And it very much depends on what your job is, right? So a controller needs a very different set of traits than an inventor or a programmer or a graphic designer or a fashion designer. So good news is, even if you're not good at everything, there's probably a job that you are built for as a human being that you'll excel in. So what I really want to focus on now is 3 paradoxes which I feel like are very important to entrepreneurs. So the first is strategic acumen, which is a combination of optimism and analyzing pitfalls. So the way to read this is if you're a 1 to 3, you're a low, 4 to 6, you're mid-moderate, 7 to 9 is high, and if a 10, it actually means you're almost overcompensating. So you think being a 10 is good, but it's something you need to a little bit watch out for. So in this case, you have optimism, which is the paradoxes with analyzing pitfalls. So if you're not good at analyzing pitfalls, you're effectively a blind optimist. That's a real problem. Likewise, if you're not optimistic but you're great at analyzing pitfalls, you're going to be incredibly skeptical. You're not going to want to do anything, and you're not going to be a lot of fun to be around. So what you really are trying for is you want to have a positive attitude about the future, but be mindful about when the difficulties that can arise when they're small and before they become big problems. So this is a trait that's really important for entrepreneurs. It's one that I'm fortunate to be pretty good at. Now, the thing to remember about this is these traits doesn't mean you're good or bad at it. It's a little bit your natural reservoir for that trait. So if you're high, so let's say you're a 7.5 or an 8 on optimism, what this means is your reservoir of optimism never depletes. And when it does, it quickly refills. So you can have a horrible day. You get sued. Your lead developer leaves. You got turned down for financing. Your product's a flop. And you wake up the next day and you say, today is going to be a great day. I'm going to fix all that shit and it's going to be awesome. So that's somebody who's high in optimism. So you could be a 3 or a 4 in optimism, and when that bad stuff happens to you, it might take you 2-3 weeks to get back to being yourself again. So as you can imagine, as an entrepreneur where a lot of bad stuff's going to happen, optimism is very important. So as you look at these traits, remember, they're not what you're good or bad at. It's what you naturally gravitate to and what you have energy to do. So another interesting trait, and one that I'm horrible at, is communication. And as a CEO, you got to be really good at communication. You need to lead your team. You need to talk to investors. And communication is really two different. This paradox is two traits. It's frank, which is the ability to be straightforward, direct, and to the point, and to be diplomatic, the tendency to state things in a tactful manner. So the way to read this halo is sort of where your natural behaviors lie. So half the time I'm blunt, half the time I just avoid communication. And when I get stressed, I actually shut people down by being overly blunt. It's not a great place to be. One is a couple interesting things have happened. So my entire management team, when they took this, the way they like to be communicated to is actually with frankness and bluntness. So somebody in our organization who wants to be spoke to with diplomacy just will not survive at GISFAB because most of us don't have the skills to do it. But so the lesson I learned from this, and it was one thing that just turned my whole life around, is, okay, I don't like communicating, do it first thing in the morning, because my reservoir depletes really quickly. So when I come in, I don't look at numbers, I don't look at stats, I don't answer my emails. I immediately set up the first 4 or 5 most difficult conversations that I need to have, and I try to get all of that done by 2 or 3, because the other part of the job, I can do all night long, and I can do every weekend, but I can only have so many communications because it drains me. So this is a trait that I've learned to compensate for. Now, the other way you can do this is by who do you bring onto your team. So Roxanne Lucas, who's actually going to be on the diversity panel later, so she's our head of HR, which is now the people team. Now, you can get by as a CEO not being great at communication if you work on it. You're not going to survive as the head of HR. So compared to me, she's high in frankness and diplomatic, so she's the forthright diplomat. So when she needs to, she can be blunt. When she needs to, she can be diplomatic and tactful and work through a lot of the people, work through how do we get the best out of our people. So you can sort of see how you can get offsetting team members to work through your weaknesses. Another dimension, which obviously is critical for new entrepreneurs, especially at the early stage, is innovation. So the key to invention is to have a focused determination while letting the imagination run wild. So there's two opposed, and this is what's so cool about this to me, the Harrison assessment, is if you're really great at experimenting, but you have no persistence, you're just never going to finish anything, right? You've seen those people, they sit there in a meeting, they have 1,000,000 ideas, but they come back next week and they got nothing done. They just have a list of another 1,000,000 ideas. On the flip side, you know people who are really persistent, where they so much believe in their one idea and they don't like to experiment, they keep trying to make it work, though the data clearly is saying, hey, that idea is no good. So the ideal piece here is you want to be inventive, which is a combination of being persistent, but also being really good at experimenting. So just a quick story, and then I'll go to explain how this can help you guys hire the right teams and work together as a team. Is my wife finally got tired of me talking about the Harrison assessment at home and said, I just got to take this thing that you keep talking about. It sounds ridiculous, but maybe I'll understand it more if I take it. And I've been married to my wife for 11 years, so we figured we knew almost everything about each other. Now, what was a complete surprise to me, I knew that she was not the most optimistic person on the planet, but I've seen about 100 of these. I've never actually seen a 3 on optimism. So I found out that my wife is the least optimistic person that I've ever met, at least that's on a Harrison assessment, and she's very good at analyzing pitfalls, so she's naturally skeptical. So we decided to buy a new house, and it was a 1950s house that needs a ton of work. And as all the inspection reports were coming in, you know, hey, the plumbing needs to be completely replaced, and the roof is failing, and the solar system that heats the water is from the 70s and of course doesn't work. She actually had to say, like, why are we selling a perfectly good house, moving into a house where everything's broken? I can't even be on these inspection reports anymore. Whereas I'm like, oh, it's a great opportunity. We can put in new plumbing, and we can, of course, we want to put a new solar system in, and you know, we can do everything and really see the future on it. So it does work. It is true. This is sort of an example from my personal life. It's also made me a little more sensitive to realizing that it might take my wife a little longer to recover when things go badly, as well as sometimes my optimism may be a little overboard. So where does this come in? I think the most important part is hiring the right team. If you read the book Good to Great, right, it's about getting the right people on the bus. So internally at JustFab, we think about sort of 3 things making up hiring. It's 50% eligibility. So if you're hiring a programmer, how good are they at programming, right? If they're not good at programming, they're probably not going to be a good programmer. The other 30% is suitability. So do they have the cultural personality to be successful in our organization, or do they have the profile just to be successful at that job? So for example, you don't want to have probably a general counsel or a CFO that's super high in risking and bad at analyzing pitfalls. That would be a problem. And the last 20% is just how good are they at the interview. I think you try to not have bias, but you got to be honest, when somebody nails an interview, you're more tempted to hire that person. So the hardest dimension is the suitability. This is the one you usually say, gosh, I wish I knew this personality quirk about that person before I hired them. So instead of you waiting 3-4 months to realize this is how they need to be communicated with, or that they're just not a cultural fit, you can screen that out at the beginning. And it's far more important this is the one place in building your team I don't believe in taking risks. It's better to pass on somebody that may not be a fit, because it can be so detrimental to your overall team, and it takes you so long to fix that problem. So it can help you a lot on that suitability assessment. So the second is, if you look at what does Eli Manning, Albert Pujols, and a former Tiger Woods all have in common, all world-class athletes, but they all have coaches. Whether it's a swing coach or a pitching coach or throwing coach. So you take athletes, you sign them to $100 million contracts, and then you give them coaches. Now, for the first 16 years of my careers, I was anti-coaching for executives of, we've got a million things going on, we're hiring the best, they should know how to do their job. And I was so wrong. And if I could change anything about the past, that is what I would change. Because if you think about it, if you're at early stage, you're investing your friends and family's money, and then eventually you're going to get people to give you millions of dollars of investors' monies. You maybe have done this once, twice, or 3 times before, so you don't have a whole ton of experience, and what you're doing is already really hard and has a high likelihood of failing. So to not get a coach to help you through that seems crazy. It's something you really, my view, you can't afford not to do. So I would also say invest in yourself and in your team with coaching. And I think the Harrison assessment is a good tool for those coaching sessions, but if you don't like it, find something else. But there are people out there that can help you be better at your job. If you can help world-class athletes who are already the best in the world, they can certainly help individuals like me. I added some coaching in about 18 months ago, and it completely changed how I run the business on a day-to-day. And if you actually match that up into how the business has performed, we've had our 2 best years tied to those times. The other one is really looking at team dynamics and figuring out what does your team need, because you don't need a team of all the same people who think exactly the same way. So one dynamic that nobody in our team is super strong at until recently is this dynamic of enforcing and warmth and empathy. So who's going to sort of make the trains go on time? So if you're really high at enforcing, but you don't have any warmth and empathy, you're going to come across as harsh. And I think people have worked with individuals that are just very harsh. And if you don't have any enforcing, but you're really warm, you're just going to be permissive. So people are going to not hit their deadlines and do what they need to do because there's no consequences for doing it. So across our entire 18-person executive management team, everybody was sort of low to mid-moderate at enforcing. So when it was time for us to add a COO to our organization, the one trait we said, they have got to be this compassionate enforcer. A lot of other stuff we can sacrifice on. If they're not perfect fit, that's okay. But that we need. And I think this assessment not only told us what we needed, but to ensure the person was the right person. So this circle here is our COO. So into this, coming into this, I actually asked an individual much more familiar with the Harrison assessment than myself, what is the most common balance for entrepreneurs, and what are traits that are very important for entrepreneurs? So to be successful, you got to be high risking, you got to have high optimism, and you really should be high at analyzing pitfalls. And most entrepreneurs are very high at risking, so why they quit their job to start their own company. They're very optimistic. You want to change the way the world works. You don't start a company because you think you're going to fail. You start a company because you think you're going to be successful. But they often are not great at analyzing pitfalls. So simply being aware, if that is your weakness, it can make you when you wake up and say, hey, what should I be thinking about today that could go wrong? And I'll spend the rest of the day thinking about what will go right. Or you can use that when you hire your CFO or you find your business partner or your CTO, find somebody who balances you out. It really helps. It helps tremendously. So, really, I wish I had some better secret because it sort of sounds cliche now that I see it up here on a slide. But if you want to be successful over the long haul, hire the right people. When you make a mistake at hiring the right people, realize you made a mistake really quickly and make a change. Oftentimes people wait way too long. But hire the right people, especially your first 5-10 hires are going to completely shape your culture in your company. And then once you have those people, spend some time doing formal team building and learning how to operate as a team. Because everybody likes to communicate differently and work together differently. So I think that's a really important dynamic. Somebody can be crazy, like, hey, I'm going to really spend money on this, so I'm trying to decide which bills I'm going to pay. But you will never go wrong investing a little bit of money in yourself here. So that's the data I ignored for the first 16 years. Hopefully, I promise you the Harrison assessment people did not pay me to come up here and say it. But that's, my view is, get the data on people, use it. Thank you, guys. So we have a few minutes. So I don't know if there's any questions. I'm happy to take a few moments and. Yep.
So has there ever been a moment where the test has indicated something and the reality has been completely different?
Well, one thing cool about the test, it actually will tell you if somebody's trying to cheat the test. So it's so sophisticated, it will know if you're not being consistent on your answers. So not often, but we've had a couple people interview that it just says, hey, there's a 95% chance this person was not truthful, that we have to ask them to go back and say, were you distracted, or can you do this again? So there are times that people have tried to cheat it. I think it's pretty spot on. I think it's sometimes a question of how much people are willing to acknowledge or believe it. But I've seen it be pretty accurate. Yep. Yep.
Have you been able to get your investors and board members to take this?
So I was able to get all the partners at Crosscut to take it, and they loved it, and they did a whole session around it and found it really helpful. I have not been able to get many of the board members to take it yet, but I do try. It's a good. So yep.
So you talked a lot about the importance of suitability. Besides the assessment and intuition, what other tools would help you, find out about suitability?
Well, that's actually why we have the assessment, because suitability usually is this gut. Like you meet somebody, like I have a feeling they're going to work well in our team, but you've only met them 2, 3, 4, 5 times. So it's sort of the data behind suitability. So it really is what we rely on for it. Now, what is cool, not to geek out on this, but as you get bigger as a company, you can actually create a suitability profile. So what we've done at JustFab is we've actually taken 30 of our, we think, best cultural fits, 30 of the people that were not cultural fits, and 30 of the people that were sort of in the middle. And then based on that, we saw which traits, not us, the Harrison assessment team found out which traits were common among these. So now when we have a new employee, we can actually get a gauge of their cultural profile fit of being successful in our organization. We have hired people that have not been cultural fits, and most of the time we regret those decisions. So we do that less frequently these days. Yep. I think, Bambi, did you have a, no? Yep.
Talk about the co-CEO. Talk about the pros and cons of that, and where he stacks up on the test review.
Yeah, so there's Brewer back there from. So there has been some analogies. There's been a couple. Actually, Brett gave the quote of that we're like the guys from Twins, where I was Danny DeVito and he was Arnold Schwarzenegger. So thank you, Brett, for that quote. So if you can find the right partner, I think it's great because it's pretty lonely at the top. You're going to have a lot of challenges. So having somebody that truly is in it with you and you can share that with is key and critical. It's pretty important, though, that your culture, that you see eye to eye. Now, that does not mean that you agree, but that when you disagree, that you can resolve it very quickly and then have a shared vision. So we argue all the time, and we disagree often, but once we walk out of that room, we make a decision. That's our decision, and it's not his or mine. We both live with it. In our case, we're building a fashion company, so I don't know a lot about fashion. I can barely dress myself in the morning. This is a dream come true because Don's super into fashion. So he's driving the brand direction, managing the fashion designers, the creative directors, the studio group, and then I work on other areas. So my advice on it would be if you have a co-CEO, really upfront, agree on what your guys' strengths and weaknesses are, and sort of agree that, hey, you make these decisions, I'm going to make other ones. You'll share views, but defer to the person who's better in that area. I know it's sort of. I've also invested in some companies where the co-CEO thing has worked really poorly, so I don't think there's a right or wrong on it. All right. Well, thank you guys very much.